All right, the U.S. Census Bureau yesterday delivered the 2020 census state population counts that are used to determine how many seats each state will have in the U.S. House of Representatives and how many electoral votes each state will have. Well, Texas emerged as the big winner, gaining 2 House seats, while Colorado, Florida, Montana, North Carolina, and Oregon each racked up 1 new seat. This is important stuff because you get more representation in Congress. This is also based upon some allocations of how federal funds go for highways and all kinds of stuff. So it's important stuff. But 7 states gain, or 6 states gain 7 seats. 7 states lose 1 seat each. California, Illinois, Michigan, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. Now, notably, California's loss is the first time since becoming a state in 1850. So what can we draw from this, and what impact will this have? Joining me now to talk about this is Chuck DeVore, who is among those who moved from the census's first-time loser, California, to the big winner, Texas. He served in the California State Assembly from 2004 to 2010, and he is now vice president of the Texas Public Policy Foundation. He also wrote an article that was published just last month on how hundreds of thousands of Americans have been making the move to freedom, leaving these progressive states for free states. Chuck, welcome to Washington Watch.
Hey, it's great to be with you, Tony. Thank you for having me.
All right, I'm not getting audio from Chuck. Got audio coming through. Let's get that.
It's great to be with you, Tony.
We'll get that worked out.
Oh, my.
We got it. Okay, there you are. We got you, Chuck.
Hey, it's great to be with you, Tony. Thank you for having me on your show.
Well, this is interesting stuff. There seems to be a pattern here. I mean, I was a police officer on the street, wasn't a detective, but I can tell there's something happening here. People are leaving these big blue, oppressive, high tax, high regulation states to places that are freer.
Yeah, this has been going on for quite some time, and there's various ways of measuring it. For example, you can look at the level of taxation in the state, and that can be a pretty reliable guide as to domestic migration. That's state-to-state migration. Frequently, though, states that lose a lot of people domestically see that made up with international in-migration. So New York and California, while they lose a lot of people every year, they also gain a lot of people, both legal and illegal immigrants. So this has been going on for quite some time. You know, another way to measure it is through the Fraser Institute. Every year they publish the Economic Freedom of North America Index. It looks at taxation, it looks at government spending, and it looks at labor law or union strength. And what's fascinating about that is if you look at the bottom 5 states in the Fraser ranking, that would include New York and Vermont and Alaska, interestingly enough, California, West Virginia. Every state that could lose a seat in the bottom 5 did lose a seat. Obviously, Vermont and Alaska can't lose any more. They only have 1. So that's an interesting indication that people like freedom. They don't like to live in these oppressive, high-tax states.
So this is people voting with their feet. They're leaving these states, and I've read some articles that you can vote, and we certainly encourage people to vote when it comes election time. But there's one way to make an immediate effect, not only upon the environment in which you're leaving, but for your own personal life, to move to a state that is freer, has lower taxes, lower government burdens. I mean, it's an opportunity for those that want to start in a new place.
It is. And another interesting indication is you look at U-Haul rates. The do-it-yourself mover has kind of a real-time indicator as to where working Americans, or people who are certainly willing to shoulder the burden themselves in moving, are going to. And the reason why is that when you have a lot of people going from one place to another, but not a lot of people going back, U-Haul has to pay somebody to reposition that truck back in the state where people are moving out of. And that's reflected in their rates real time. So just a couple of days ago, I looked up the cost of renting a 26-foot truck and going from the Silicon Valley to Austin, Texas, and then from Austin, Texas, back to Silicon Valley. And the cost to go from Texas to California, which is, of course, the direction that not a lot of people are going, was 5 times less than the cost of going from Silicon Valley to Austin. So almost $6,000 to rent the truck going from California to Texas, but just a little over $1,000 to rent the same kind of truck going from Texas to California.
Well,
Because U-Haul has to
honestly,
hire so many people to reposition those trucks.
yeah, I mean, that's a deal for the U-Haul, because I tell you that you would have to pay me to move from Texas to California. I'm not going to, I mean, but that's what we see happening. And here's one of the challenges, I think, in this, and I've seen this, in fact, in Texas, we've seen this, is there are those that are trying to turn Texas blue. You see a lot of these corporations that doing the same thing that individuals are doing. They're looking for jurisdictions that are more favorable to business, lower taxes, lower regulations. But sometimes these people, they don't leave their bad policy behind, and they're like, they're worse than COVID-19. They infect the local community with liberalism.
Yeah, what you're seeing is certainly that's often the case with these big multinational corporations. But when they move, as many of them have in the last few years, from California or elsewhere to Texas, most of those corporate moves really don't take a lot of people with them. A lot of times they hire locally and give, of course, their employees the option of staying in the state, where they currently live. Most of the growth, though, is occurring with family-owned businesses, with entrepreneurs, with people who run their own business. And we've done some polling here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and there's been other polls in the past that would suggest, I mean, the jury is still out, but the data we've gathered so far would suggest that the new arrivals to Texas, which is about 40% of the Texas population, by the way, was not born in Texas, that these new arrivals are as conservative or more conservative than the native born. So I don't
that sounds
think
pretty
that,
good. Hold that thought, because we're up against a break. We're going to come back and finish this conversation. So let's leave it on a high note, and we're coming back. Don't go away, folks. Talking census data, the Census Bureau releasing its state information yesterday, and we're going to see a shift of about 7 congressional seats, and the vast majority going to red states, with the exception being Illinois. Illinois is losing. Colorado and Oregon both gaining 1 seat, not real red states, obviously. But you have most of these folks are fleeing the east and moving to the south and the west. South is the only region to have a 10% growth, over a double-digit growth, over 10%. Joining me to talk about this, Chuck DeVore. He is a former member of the California State Assembly, but now resides in the state of Texas as the vice president of Texas Public Policy Foundation. So, Chuck, we left on a high note. You were saying that people coming to Texas are actually as conservative or more conservative. They probably have in that U-Haul a bunch of guns too, because they're trying to get away to a place where they can have the freedom to have a gun.
Or they'll buy some when they get to Texas. So. It's interesting that you mentioned Oregon and Colorado, because, of course, Oregon benefits from the fact that while it doesn't have particularly low taxes, it doesn't have a sales tax, but it does have fairly high property taxes and income taxes. It's next door to California, which, of course, has the highest income tax rate in the nation. And
So
culturally, it's not a big shift,
compared.
right?
Yeah.
Right. So you can improve your life by going from California to Oregon. And you'll find that the state is just as liberal politically. And similarly, a lot of Californians move to Colorado.
Yeah, I was going to say the same. That's what's happened in Colorado. You have a lot of folks from California that have gone there as well. All right, let's talk, Chuck, about the impact that this will have on Congress as we see, 4 solidly red states picking up seats here. What does this tell us about the midterm election?
Well, I think it increases the odds that the 2022 election is going to result in a shift in who holds the speaker's gavel. It's interesting that California is losing a seat, and of course Nancy Pelosi is the dean of the California delegation. The legislature doesn't control redistricting in California anymore. A supposedly independent commission does, although it tends to lean left. But wouldn't it be ironic if Nancy Pelosi was put into a seat with another Democrat and had to fight a game of musical chairs as to who gets to go forward and still be a
Chuck,
member of Congress?
that's not that far-fetched when we saw how the Democratic Party there responded to Barbara Boxer. I mean, you've got real progressives out there in California that see Nancy Pelosi as a squish.
Oh, absolutely, that's the case. And you may see some pretty interesting fights because, of course, California now has this jungle primary that's very similar to the one that's in Louisiana, where the top two vote getters go on to the general election, regardless of party and regardless of whether someone gets 50% plus one or not. So
yeah, they call it a jungle primary for a reason. I've been through that jungle.
Crazy.
So this increases the odds for the Republicans to capture the gavel with nothing else in consideration.
Well, that and the fact that you also have redistricting occurring in the 50 states, or certainly the states that have more than one congressional district. And so in places like Arizona or Texas or Georgia, where you have enough districts to kind of play with, and you have a Republican legislature and a Republican governor, although I'm trying to remember, I think Arizona may also have an independent commission now. But when you have states where you have unified partisan control and the ability to redraw the lines, it's anyone's game at that point. The only way you can stop it is if you can somehow bring federal civil rights charges in federal court and somehow claim that the partisan gerrymander overstepped its bounds racially or ethnically. You really can't make the charge based on partisanship. And so that's probably what we're going to see to try to put a brake on this. But imagine, if Texas with 40 seats, imagine what the legislature can do to kind of optimize the number of Republicans that might go from Texas to the U.S. Congress.
Right. The Cook report says that they expect Republicans to gain anywhere from 0 to 8 seats based upon just the map changes, which would be enough to shift the balance of control in the United States House.
Right, and that's not even considering the usual midterm losses for the party that occupies the White House. That's usually what happens, and we'll see. We'll see how the economy does. Obviously, we want to root for America. We want to root for the president. But frankly, the policies that he's putting in place seek to impose California style of philosophy over the whole country. It's important for your viewers to understand that, when you have 50 states, each competing with each other on their tax code and their regulatory burden, that's a good thing. That's the laboratory of democracy. And you see people moving from, non-free states to free states. That's the general pattern. But the federal government can kind of override that by, for example, increasing the minimum wage or getting rid of the SALT cap deduction or spending an enormous amount of money to bail out profligate blue states that tax and spend too much. And when that happens, the federal government can kind of level the playing field and kind of ruin or bulldoze this competition between the states. And I'm afraid that may occur, especially because the vice president is from California.
Yeah.
And I know the Californians don't want to cut taxes and they don't want to cut their regulations. So, of course, the easy path for California is you just make the rest of the country California.
Like California, which America can't survive. Chuck DeVore, we're out of time. Thanks so much for joining us. Great to talk with you.
Thank you.